Right, let's dive right into it with our first session on how Europe can preserve its seat at the offshore renewables table, even though there's pressure from all sides. And to talk about that, I'd like to ask Alexander VANDENBERGHE, Head of Innovation at WindEurope, to join me on stage. Good morning.
Good morning, Lisa.
Thank you for joining us. So, could you first paint the picture of where offshore wind stands in Europe right now?
Yeah, very good. Maybe let me start it even a bit wider and just give you the headline figures of wind as a whole. So, as of the 31st of December of last year, we have 285 gigawatts of wind energy installed capacity here in Europe. And those gigawatts provide for 20% of our electricity demand across Europe. If we zoom in on offshore wind, we see that it's 10% of the installed capacity, 37 gigawatts, but 20% of the wind production. So 4% of Europe's total energy production comes from offshore wind. The sector employs around 80,000 people here in Europe. And just a little fact, one offshore turbine installed generates economic activity of more than 20 million euros every time.
Well, so quite a lot of potential here in Europe. However, there has been a lot of political upheaval over the past few years. You had Donald Trump being re-elected this year, well, coming back into the White House this year. Russia's invasion of Ukraine that started back in February 2022. There's also increased competition from Asia. How much of an impact is all that having on offshore wind development here in Europe?
So that's a very good question. And I think before we delve into that, I think we need to recognize that the offshore wind sector in Europe is at a crossroads. So I told you some of the numbers. That's the good news show. You know, the ambitions of governments are still very high for offshore wind. There's a North Sea declaration, 120 gigawatt of offshore wind capacity by 2030 in the North Sea, 300 gigawatt by 2050. Those ambitions are very, very high. However, we also see that it's harder and riskier to get offshore wind farms built and executed. We have seen that just last year, just 2.6 gigawatts of capacity reached final investment decision. That's very low. We're building roughly 10 gigawatts simultaneously in Europe now. We just reached FID on 2.6 gigawatts. To reach that ambitions, things need to change. And there are some challenges that we need to address. Here in Europe, for instance, it is electrification. The rate of electrification is slowing down or stagnating. We're consuming 23% of our energy comes from electricity, just 23%. The US, China, they have higher shares of electricity, and they are accelerating it. Yeah, that reduces the need for more electricity capacity to be connected to the grid. The grid is a second bottleneck. Grid build-out is low. It takes many times. There's a German wind farm that is installed, perfectly installed, Borkum Riffgrund 3, but it has no grid connection. So it will be idle for more than a year before it can actually start its operations. Curtailment is also going up. Even here in France, about 20 to 25% of offshore wind production was curtailed, not reaching the consumers. And then we have a changing geopolitical landscape in which we have to navigate as a sector. You mentioned Russia, you mentioned Trump, you mentioned China. Let me try to maybe address those three elements. But the three of them have in common is that the rules of the game have changed. The old paradigm of free trade brings prosperity for all. It's an idea. We still hold to it. We still believe it's true. But at a global level, there are now actors that say, we don't play by that rule. We don't believe in that goal. And it just takes one of those actors to say that to change the whole game. And that's where we're at right now. So for Europe, what we need to do is we need to become recognizant of that fact. and build in more resilience. There's no more room for naivety in Europe, so we need to be more resilient. And resilience means, when it comes to, let's say, the Trump administration 2.0 in the US, it's clear that the US is no longer the reliable trade partner it once was. So we need to look elsewhere. When it comes to Russia and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it has made clear, by bringing war back to the continent, that resilience, we need to be more focused on defense, but also on energy security. Yeah? Moving away from the fossil fuel imports that we have, and we still have today. So we moved away from Russian gas. We're now getting it from the US, Saudi, Qatar. Maybe not the best long-term solutions. So there's a push for clean tech away from fossil fuels altogether. That's great. And then comes China, which is the looming question behind all this. And for China, it's more a matter of not repeating the same mistakes. Meaning, substituting or moving away from fossil fuels imported from Russia and create a dependency there, and switching that into a dependency on clean tech from China, that's equally dependent. That's equally not resilient. And that will create the same problems again in the future. And so the way forward is looking to domestic supply chains in clean tech, in materials, looking at more reliable partners outside of the traditional ones, maybe looking more at Canada, Australia, reinvigorating relations with Africa, South America, and building partnerships based on values that we hold here true in the EU.
So could this also be an opportunity for certain market participants here in Europe, do you think?
Well, it's actually a very good opportunity for wind energy and for offshore wind, because offshore wind provides precisely that resilience. Wind is a local energy source. You don't need to import it. Europe has a technology, and the equipment is still being made here in Europe. All but 3 small turbines in the south of Italy, all offshore wind turbines that are installed in Europe are being made in Europe. So we have the technology, we have the manufacturing, we have the experience of what makes a good offshore wind project. That also means that we know when a project is not a good project. And we'll probably have some more opportunities later on the day to learn on some of the experience recently in offshore wind on which projects are no longer a good project, and therefore they maybe get halted. But we have the experience of working with stakeholders, understanding the market, and making a good offshore wind project work. So we have all the cards on the table. Right now, the role for Europe is to make sure that the rules of the game for offshore wind play to the strengths of those cards that we have here at the table. And those are that in Brussels, those are the discussions that are on the Net Zero Industry Act. Yeah? Boosting the local capacity in manufacturing of clean tech. Setting requirements, pre-qualification and non-price criteria, value-driven criteria for renewable energy auctions, including all offshore wind auctions as of next year. That will be mandatory. And that's the opportunity for Europe and for offshore wind in Europe.
Thank you very much. So challenging times. Thank you very much, Alexander VANDENBERGHE, Head of Innovation at WindEurope.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.